transition. Jury's still out on Ban Ki-moon's likely effectiveness in this respect, and that of the team underneath him, but it sure as hell isn't for want of trying on our part to try and set the agenda on some.
The former Labor Foreign Minister Gareth Evans, these days Brussels-based, has headed up the International Crisis Group for the past 6 years.
Nonetheless, we're all acutely aware that a precipitate withdrawal could make the present bloodbath look very much worse.
His board boasts genuine international heavyweights, movers and shakers like billionaire philanthropist George Soros, four-star General Wesley Clark.
Give us a presentation on trends in armed conflict.
The former Governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten. The former President of Chile, Ricardo Lagos. The former Canadian PM, Kim Campbell. Former Dutch Prime Minister, Wim Kok. And the former golden boy of Malaysian politics, the now out-of-jail Anwar Ibrahim. In fact, the crisis group's list of board members with clout in world politics and business goes on and on.
Seeing us visibly engaged in this.
So, being here on the spot, we managed to buttonhole a few of these would-be world savers to find out why they think the world needs the International Crisis Group. How should I address somebody like yourself at this point in your life?
Oh, you call me General or Sir?
General or Sir?
You can call me West.
As a person with your background, a military background, a highly decorated military background, now working with an organisation trying to stop conflict, how do you reconcile those two things? To an outsider, it seems like a strange organisation for someone like yourself to be associated.
Really? You think military were people who wanted to start conflicts?
No, I was just wondering how...
No, but do you think that?
No, probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I mean, I used an international crisis group to try to prevent conflict.
Right.
And when I was working in the Balkans in the 90s, the International Crisis Group had the best people on the ground and gave me the best picture of what was happening on the ground.
Yep.
That's why I joined the board, because I think they are an effective preventive diplomacy organization that can help stop war.
Well, that proves a
and
point.
Nobody wants to stop war more than people in uniform.
Would you describe, as a former American presidential candidate, would you describe the US at the moment in the world, so far as conflict is concerned and the crises that we face, as part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, I think there's no question that America's legitimacy has been compromised by an unnecessary action in Iraq that's been not only unnecessary but been poorly handled in the aftermath. We really need to rebuild America's legitimacy. I just came back from the region and talked to leaders in several countries over there and a lot of businessmen and so forth. They want American help. They don't want us to turn tail and leave, and the American people don't want to leave.
How did you get involved with the ICG? It's not a well-known organisation in Australia, unfortunately.
Oh, really easily. When I was Europe's Commissioner for External Relations, I found that when I was going on visits to difficult places, I was relying far more on ICG reports than on anything else.
Amazing collection of people, amazing array of people with clout.
And when they first went to the British government to ask for money, the official they talked to in the Foreign Office said, just let me get this straight, you want us to give you a golden stick so you can beat us over the head. And the interesting thing is that the British government, for example, which we're not always very complimentary about, and which we sometimes give what some would regard as unwelcome advice to, is now our biggest supporter.
What would you think is the most dire crisis in the world today? What's the worst conflict or other kind of area that we have to be looking at?
I'm myself very nervous about Pakistan and Afghanistan. I'm not convinced that having generals in charge in Pakistan is all that stands between us and the collapse of civilization as we know it.
Maybe a bit of regime change there wouldn't go astray.
Well, I think an election would be an awful lot of help, and
a full and free one.
And if you look at Afghanistan at the moment, there's no question that a lot of the insurgency in Afghanistan is being organised from outside. There's no question that Al-Qaeda are based in the frontier provinces in Pakistan. So I'm worried about Pakistan. and that whole play of issues from Central Asia through to the Middle East. But if we sorted out Israel, Palestine, and everybody knows what the settlement will be at the end of the day, that's what's so frustrating.
There is not going to be in the foreseeable future a heavenly peace in the Middle East. One needs to be realistic. What we need to achieve is a political solution to have internationally legitimized borders between Israel and the Arab world. Will these usher in a heavenly peace for the entire Middle East? I don't believe so, because there are so many other problems. You need to think in terms of the stability of the regimes, the integration of the masses, the question of democracy. And there are other issues in the Middle East, the Kurds, look at what is going on in Sudan with Darfur. So there are many problems that are not related to the Arab-Israeli problem. Yet, nonetheless, the solution of the Arab-Israeli problem would be a major contribution to regional stability.
People like Gerhard Vollmer, for instance, does he listen? Could he care less what the international crisis would think?
Well,
or the Hamas leaders?
Well, I think that there is here a unique combination of respectability and credibility of people and the message. After all, having been in government, I can tell you that governments don't think. They don't have time to think. And when
that's a very damning comment.
Well, yes, it is. This is the simple reality. I mean, you are chasing the urgent matters rather than the important matters.
The immediate becomes the urgent.
Yeah. Exactly.
You talked about moving on a crisis before it becomes a conflict. What do you think, from this group's point of view, or your own, should be done about Iran? Is that potentially...
Iran? Oh, I think we have to talk to the Iranians.
Yeah, that's a situation that could go from crisis to conflict.
The thing about it is, the Iranians, first of all, they don't really believe there's an American threat. I do. The United States Armed Forces are very, very powerful, and while I'm not advocating the use of a threat, I think the Iranians should be very concerned, because throughout the spectrum of political opinion in the United States, politicians of every stripe have said no nuclear weapons for Iran. Unacceptable.
Yeah, but a person with your point of view would have to be worried if there was an escalation and there was an attack against Tehran.
I don't think there needs to be an escalation right now. I think what should happen is the administration should be talking to the Iranians. And they should be talking to the Iranians no holds barred.
At the highest level.
Well, I don't think President Bush needs to go to Tehran. But I do think that senior U.S. leadership should be talking to the Iranians without requiring them to halt their enrichment activities. That's like asking for preemptive surrender. The question is, who has the leverage to move the United States and the Iranians into open dialogue?
Who does?
That's the question.
Who does?
Right now, no one. And that's the danger for the whole world.
Wonderful talking. Thanks for your time. We were talking earlier about how preoccupied we all are with the Middle East and the Gulf. But Zimbabwe, you'd think internationally, is almost a case where you could validate regime change. I mean, what is the world doing about Zimbabwe other than standing by and gnashing its teeth and beating its breast?
Well, what are the options? I mean, do you send the military force in there? That's rather tricky to justify. Try to encourage the South Africans to exercise their undoubted muscle and clout. Unquestionably, yes, and the South African performance has been lamentable. And a lot of us have not been slow, in fact, in saying that. In terms of giving humanitarian support, putting travel bans and all sorts of other sanctions on Mugabe and the characters around him. Europeans have already done that to some effect, but this is a tough one.
Are you hopeful about the state of the globe?
I'm generally pessimistic about this because our country, the United States, has gone so far in the direction of creating fear among the people. And when you get that much fear, people are much likely to want to turn to arms. We have a lot of turning around to do. which is one of the reasons I was politically involved as I am. The U.S. is a big part of the problem for two reasons. One is we are so bellicose, and the second is because we have spent our treasury for the next 40 years on Iraq, we have almost nothing to spend on development aid, which could really do something for the world.
Would George Bush be among the people that you think takes notice of what the International Crisis Group is saying? Would he pick up an International Crisis Group report if it landed on his desk in the White House?
If George Bush read all of our reports, we probably wouldn't be getting the $500,000 a year that we currently get from the Department of State. So I have mixed feelings about whether it would be good or bad for him to actually read our reports. I'd like him to read them because hopefully he might be persuaded by our analysis and our recommendations.
What would you be trying to persuade him from and towards at the moment? Because it's hard to believe that these people see the Americans or the US government at least as being other than part of the problem, not part of the solution where world conflict is concerned.
It all depends on which country and which region you're talking about. But in the case, for example, of Iraq, we strongly urge the U.S. to enter into a dialogue with Iran and Syria, which so far the administration resists. We've also called for the Iraqi equivalent of a lawyer jirga like the one they had in Afghanistan, which would bring together the government, major political parties, and the resistance in an effort to create a dialogue which could hopefully result in some form of reconciliation within the country.
I'm at your service, but please be a bit kind to me.
Somebody, I don't know whether it was you or somebody in the organisation, but someone said that where international conflict and crisis is concerned, that Europe was punching under its weight.
Yeah, I've said that very often.
Yeah.
With you would agree with that. The main point I have problems with is that we in Europe are insufficiently able and prepared really to unite and to speak with one voice,
despite
and act with one will. No, that's well, okay. It's always dependent on what national politicians want to realize, what their own agenda. They sometimes have a national agenda, the French or the English or the Germans and the Italians and whatsoever. I mean, these are the biggest ones.
So they're still nationalists first and Europeans second.
Well, now, be careful, be not too black and white. I mean, but there is still room for a lot of improvement.
Hi, Ken. How are you? Nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is Kate Kin, remember?
Yes, I do.
That is unfair.
For the sake of those people in our country who don't know what you actually said, what did you say?
Well, I'd rather not go into it.
That it would be a cakewalk to get rid of Saddam Hussein.
That is what I said.
Yeah.
Now, it has been interpreted since then to say our involvement in Iraq would be a cakewalk.
Big difference.
But a big difference, gigantic, which is certainly not true.
Why has it not been a cakewalk since getting rid of Saddam Hussein? I guess is what the rest of the world's asking.
That's a very good question, and there are two different camps. Whether it was a bad idea done badly, which would be Gareth's view, and I would say a prevailing view today, okay? Or whether it was a good idea done badly, which would be my view.
Right. So you thought it was okay to go there?
Oh, I thought it was wonderful.
The job wasn't done properly.
No, it was just done terribly.
What do we do now?
Number one, it was done terribly to allow the looting or to sanction the looting. It was done terribly to get rid of the army. It was done terribly to get rid of the civil service. It was done terribly the way they handled Abu Ghraib. Just about everything was done terribly. The lack of training for the first 18 months was done terribly. Everything was done terribly.
So a good idea from the point of view of the International Crisis Group, a good idea has become an even worse crisis than anybody would have imagined.
Well, it's a good idea from our point of view. We didn't ever think it was good.
No, but from Ken's point of view.
From my point of view, yes, it was. I thought there was a dream team in the national security apparatus of the United States government. It turned out to be a nightmare. And I thought that removing Saddam Hussein could be done rather effortlessly, which it was, and we could replace him with something that was basically a decent, cooperative government in the Arab world that would not have weapons of mass destruction, not attack its neighbors, and not totally oppress its people.
All we can say is, if only.
Yeah,
If only.
and I thought it was worth the chance to do it.
So what now?
This cost Ken a lifetime's friendship with Donald Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
Is that right?
No,
So you've lost,
these guys
Cheney
were very,
and
you've lost a buddy.
These guys were very
It's
close.
probably a safer thing not to be a friend of Donald Rumsfeld
I loved
these
him,
days.
but I worked for him 3 times in my life, and I certainly wouldn't have worked for him the other 2
So
times.
how has he and the
I have no
administration
idea.
got it so wrong?
Well, I just think they made a lot of mistakes. I think they were arrogant. I think they just had the wrong premise. I don't know. It's just a mystery.
So I guess what the rest of
I
us,
know what went wrong. I don't know why.
when would you start moving people out? Our Prime Minister keeps saying when the job is done. We can't quite work out what he means by that.
I think turning around the situation so that the Iraqis can take care of it themselves. You're Australian?
Yeah.
John Howard?
Yep.
Okay. But despite all of our problems, and God knows we have enormous problems, and despite all the screw-ups, and God knows we've had more screw-ups over the last 6 years than I ever could imagine, the United States remains a force for good in the world.
Good to talk to you. Thank you for your time.